His first name was Winston. He was born in a rich British family, in an upper class family. He was shaped by loneliness. He didn't get a lot of love from his parents, some from his mom, who was American, about zero from his dad. His dad actually said that he was a failure and would never amount to anything. He had a habit of memorizing eloquent passages from different authors. He loved to read. He became a soldier and a correspondent, so he was really good at writing, like Mike. And he had a great amount of time in the military, in the Boer Wars in South Africa and in Gallipoli. He did have some crushing failures, but he studied, he read, he memorized long passages. He had a real knack for speaking. And when the time came, 1940, it was Chamberlain at the beginning of World War II who was seen to be weak and too soft on Hitler. And he was forced to really kind of pushed out. And they found him as this other person as a replacement. Of course, you know his name is Winston Churchill. So when you look at the components of what made him successful, his independence, his study, his eloquence from memorizing really choice passages from various very well-written authors, and his war experience. He was Lord of the Admiralty, I believe. And so all his experiences combined that when he became Prime Minister of Britain, he was the man of the hour. All his background really set him up to be the eloquent statesman and the person with foresight and ability to lead the country as they were. We're going to find another book and another person in Esther that providentially all the pieces just came together to make her who she was, to do what she did. Let me say a little something about the Esther. This is like an Indo-European, I believe. It's related to astronomy, star, or astro. You see the A-S-T-R in there? The story of Esther fits between chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra, so it's kind of sandwiched in between them. It's between the first return under Zerubbabel and the second return under Ezra. This book provides the only account of the vast majority of Jews who stayed in Persia. So if you want to know kind of what is going on with the Jews, you get a few insights with a few people in this book. The book of Esther doesn't deal with Jerusalem or those who returned. It's also a book of pictures. Teaching pictures is that of divine providence. So it's God amidst the shadows, but at work. And it really shows that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love God or are called according to his purpose. Usually the books of Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah are studied together. Esther deals with the preservation of the people. Ezra, the restoration of the temple and the people. Ezra's emphasis is on the worship and the system of worship. Nehemiah's is restoration of the walls. And I think I said in an email, if you kind of have like a takeaway, personal takeaway, Ezra deals with worship, true, correct worship, forgiveness and worship with the temple, the altar. Whereas Nehemiah, with the restoration of the walls, is making a defense against foreign intrusion, against false teaching, against evil influence. And when you put the two together, you have correct worship, and you have a system of defense against false teaching and against evil influence. And that really says a lot about the Christian life, because we want to have both. So we want to plow our fields straight with God, but we also want to block out the tares. Who wrote Esther? So the human author can't be determined with certainty. Some people have thought maybe Mordecai. Some people thought Ezra. Some people thought it was the men of the great synagogue. Whoever it was had an eyewitness account, pro-Jewish. The king that is here, Ahasuerus, is known as Xerxes the First, Xerxes, and he is a hero in this story. But when you study Greek history, he's the villain, which is kind of interesting, because he was attempting to overtake Europe. And he initiated a couple of battles that were epic to try to conquer Europe. And one was a complete catastrophe called the Battle of Salamis. So they had, this one, the Persians hated ships, and they thought the ocean was demonic. So they didn't like sea battles at all. So forget Admiral Nelson and Trafalgar. It's not their cup of tea. They just don't like it. So they actually had a fake trader. When they saw the Persian ships coming, they had a fake trader from Greece that went to the Persians and said, you know what? I know exactly how you guys can win this. You're going to park all your ships in this spot here where they're trapped. And the Greeks had these things called trimarines, which are battering ram ships that have this big poke in them, and they would have like over 100 rowers, and they could get that thing to about like 30 knots. And it basically made the Persian fleet into splinters. And one guy came back and Xerxes had him hanged. Anyway, he had a couple of other catastrophic losses, which is amazing because this gigantic Persian Empire is fighting this itty-dinky little place of Greece. and they can't quite get them. They lost another one, the Battle of Marathon, and things like that. Anyway, this is Xerxes. So when you study European history, it's kind of like, what's he trying to do? He's trying to take more land. But he wasn't a bad ruler. So, why was Esther written? Well, it's to encourage the Jews who had returned to the promised land to show God's love and care, even in difficult circumstances. It also warns readers that anti-Jewish hostility is intolerable to God. And we'll see this. We're going to see a little resemblance of this in World War II. Her Jewish name was Hadassah, myrtle, the name of a native tree in Babylonia. So some of the exiles took those myrtle trees with them to the promised land, and there the tree became a symbol of the nation of Israel transplanted from Babylon to Palestine. Her Persian name was Esther, which means star. The myrtle tree bears a beautiful star-like flower. So the king's name, Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, or Kashayarsh, I'm sorry. Xerxes was a kind of a man with emotional extremes, and we see this in the book of Esther. We see this with his persistent attacks on Greece. We see some of his personality and his ability to sign a decree for the annihilation of the Jews, and then a few months later to make a decree allowing them to overthrow their enemies. So at a glance, we see Queen Vashti is replaced with Esther, and then we see plots against the king and the Jews. We see Esther bravely intercedes while Haman plots in 4 and 5. We'll get into this. And then the king rewards Mordecai, executes Haman. The enemies of the Jews are defeated. Okay, so what's going on here is actually one of my favorite words in the Bible that I think is a master stroke, master theme that runs all the way through the Bible, begins with the letter R, and it's reversals. So we see condemned become victor, and the oppressor become condemned. The attacker is hoisted on his own petard, to quote Shakespeare. Okay. Let me jump to this slide, which is Jensen. So we see the first 3 chapters, the Jews are threatened. So chapters 1 and 2 is the replacement of the queen, the main of the king's wives. And then there's a threat against the Jews dealing with perceived insubordination, which is interpreted by the Jews as idolatry. And then there are 2 feasts. There's a feast in 6, and then there's a feast going on in 6 and 7. This one is just with 2 guests, and it's just kind of like an introductory party. And this one is the big banquet. And then we see the deliverance of the Jews, chapters 8 through 10, and then this feast of Purim. Purim has the idea of lights, lots. And so we have commemoration and exaltation. This is from, does everyone have that book, The Ordination Practicum? If you don't have it, I can give it to you. That was the main book we had in seminary. I had Dr. Mayhew for this class, and every time we came to class, we had to memorize the outline and the essential points. And it just meant twice a week. And it was a blessing. But my copy is so messy. Then they quit making it. You can't buy it for love or money. And then I looked all over the internet, and I found one place that has it, except it's too small. But hooray, I was able to enlarge it. And so if you want it, it's now just the right size. And it looks like this. So he breaks it down this way. Threat to the Jews, 1 to 4. Triumph of the Jews, 5 through 10. So the key chapters, chapter 3, Haman persuades the king to annihilate the Jews. 6 and 7 is the reversal. Mordecai is honored, Haman is hanged. And 9, the Jews destroy their enemies and start the feast of Purim. The key passage is God has put Esther in a place of influence. The real backbone of this book is providence, is God's guiding hand. So is God mentioned? No. Is he taught? Yes. He's not mentioned by name, but you see it. If I remember correctly, no one has seen an atom, but they have seen streaks that they believe were caused by atoms. And so this is the way I picture the book of Ezra. You don't see it directly, but you see the footprints of the Almighty in it. And let me go to ways to outline the book. So it could be danger, 1 to 4, deliverance, 5 to 10, just about half-half. The feast, chapters 1 and 2, feast of Esther's, 3 through 7, and then the feast of Purim. All right, so here's what's going on. The king really wants to show that wives should be in submission to their husbands, and so he gives a banquet from for all the people who are present in the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least. And then the queen has her own banquet for the women. On the 7th day, the king was merry with wine. He commanded these eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. So he has a group of men send for her. He's going to show off his his beautiful wife. But she may have had outward beauty. She didn't quite have the inward beauty that he desired. So instead of submitting to him, she refused him, and it became a public embarrassment. Now the king is actually humiliated. He wanted to showcase that he had a nice family, that he was in charge, his wife was in submission, and she rebels. She actually is making the whole thing go backwards. So he's thinking, wait a minute, if she refuses me publicly and embarrasses me this way, it will be known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying that the queen refused the king, so I can refuse you. And basically, he's afraid of unraveling. This is kind of like a unraveling of male-female roles, he thinks. So, and he actually thinks there'll be public anger. So he is furious with her. So he searches for a replacement for her. So let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel. Let their cosmetics be given to them, so they get all prettied up. Many young ladies were gathered, and Esther was taken to the king's palace with the custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. So when it became Esther's turn to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. Okay, a couple of things here. First thing is, she's teachable. I mean, there could be some of the women who just said, you know what, forget you, I know what I do, I'm just going to do my own thing, I'm not going to listen to you. Well, this guy gives her a little coaching and says, you know, just do it, and she obeys it. She's humble, she's teachable, and likable. Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So this tells me that she has the inner qualities of a good heart, of a good person with a good heart. And then it goes on to say, the king loved Esther more than all the women. She found favor and kindness with him more than all the other virgins. So he decides she is the new head. She is the queen.
Peter, is there any chance that Mordecai was a eunuch, do you think? Because I heard that somewhere.
I don't know. That's interesting.
Because he was able to get in kind of with the women.
That could be,
Have you
possibly.
read that anywhere?
I haven't. I could explore that a little further. That's an interesting thought. He might have been, because there's a conspicuous absence of a spouse. There are some books that say Mordecai is her uncle, but she's really a cousin. Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard it asserted, and good evening, everybody.
Good evening, John.
Yes, I've heard it asserted, speaking of eunuchs, that Daniel and his friends were all made to be eunuchs.
Yes, that is correct.
Interesting, great. I wanted to hear what you had to say about that.
Okay, a little sideline with music. In the 1700s and some other time periods too, many times they did not have women singing soprano parts, but had castratos.
Yes.
Handel's Messiah originally was sung with males. And there is one man today, trying to remember his name, Easton or something like that, who is able to sing falsetto, not castrated, but falsetto beautifully, absolutely magnificently. Of course, the Beach Boys did too. So,
I wanted to ask too, though, as long as we're inserting Vashti, what's your opinion on Queen Vashti? Because that's somebody else I was talking casually to. This woman, she had named her daughter Vashti. And and this daughter was like 20 years old, so I talked to her too, really beautiful young lady. But I wondered if, since the mom was raised Christian, if she had turned away from Christianity and was rather cynically naming her daughter Vashti because she realized Esther's not the hero, but Vashti is. Do you have anything kind or negative, either or, about Vashti? How do you perceive her?
I perceive her as someone who was maybe, we don't know all the details. There could have been some extenuating circumstances that I don't know at her party. But it seems that she could have graciously at least made a cameo appearance. And realized...
This woman's, she asserted that Vashti was virtuous because the request was ugly and illegitimate.
I've heard that.
Mm.
She did the right thing because it was
Right.
a lewd situation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
says in the first chapter that the king was merry with wine,
Mhm.
so he may have been drunk.
Mhm.
And so there could have been a lot of other circumstances.
Just a lot of
Could
drunken
be.
men, and so she didn't
Yeah.
want to parade herself. MacArthur also says that maybe she was still pregnant with Artaxerxes. Maybe she was pregnant.
Okay, interesting. Interesting.
MacArthur says maybe she was pregnant?
Yes. In his study Bible, verse 12.
Okay.
Yeah. The
He
fact
says her
that,
reason's not recorded, it suggests it's included, that
Yeah.
it's just a drunken situation, she wanted no part of it, which
Yeah.
would be noble.
yeah, yeah. So we don't know exactly, but she gets turned away, so she loses her position. It might have been the better part of discretion to try to engineer some kind of a uncompromising situation to be able to placate the king and then make a quick exit. I don't know. They're just
You see,
Bible
God's
science.
providence at work.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
He was moving the pieces.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. But that is interesting, though, that you second that Daniel and his friends were made eunuchs to effectively undermine any sort of trouble that they might make.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So, chapter 3. So the king finds this person named Haman, and he's an Agagite. Okay, so this means he's related, probably, or a descendant from Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And so he gets put into authority over all the princes who were with him. And so this forms the test. This is one of my other favorite themes in the Bible, is testing. You can go all the way through every book of the Bible and who is being tested and how are they being tested and how does that relate to me? Because the decisions we make, the priorities we have, the reasoning we go through, all really matters to God and should be viewed in light of eternity. We are saved by faith, absolutely. But we're judged by our works. And both are true. Jesus, he will judge the thoughts and intents of the heart. That is correct. But when it talks about his judgment, he will render every man according to his deeds. And so what we do really matters. And actually, the truth of the matter, some of what we choose to think about is part of our deeds. So just my thought on that. I absolutely think it's wonderful to think about Judgment Day. This is the final exam. He's given us the study sheet, which is the Bible, and we're to align our life to look at, this is Bible, this is my life, am I living in light of God's Word? If I were judged today, how would I do? And then we ask for forgiveness, but it's all built around our final accountability. How are we doing? Okay. Sorry, get off that podium. Okay. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down, paid homage to Haman. Okay, so they're all bowing, and Mordecai will not bow down or pay homage. Verse 3. And this becomes his test. The king's servants say, "Why are you transgressing the king's command?" So just do it. And by the way, this whole test here is the exact, very, very similar parallel with Daniel chapter 3. With Daniel and his friends refusing to bow down. And I love what they said there. They said that we will not bow down. Be it known to you, O king, that we will not bow down and worship those gods. And our God whom we serve is able to deliver. And I love these words. But even if not, be it known unto the king, we will not bow down. And that, but even if not, I absolutely love. God is able to do it. If he chooses not to, I still won't. It's beautiful. And it's very similar to this I see with Mordecai. He's to offer some sort of obeisance, worship, service that is contrary to the word of God. It's offending his conscience. They had spoken him daily. So every day, Mordecai, what are you doing? You've got to, everyone's doing, just do it. Just, you worship God, just keep it a separate compartment and just bow down. He will not do it. He says, I am a Jew. Haman is filled with rage. So he pleads his religious convictions. Then Haman says to the king, you know what, king? There's some people over here. They're actually from another place. They're foreigners. And their laws are different from the laws of other people. They do not observe, will not observe the king's laws. And then he says, well, you know what? It's in your best interest, even if you're not ticked off. It's in the interest of the kingdom that you don't let them remain. And then he goes on to grease the wheels and to ask for the power to do whatever he wants with them. Let it be decreed, I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. Aha, it's financially profitable. The king says, silver is yours, the people also, do with them as you please. So now they send out letters all over the place, all over the kingdom, and they did have a good system of roads. And so they're going to kill or annihilate the Jews in the entire empire, which is like Holocaust 1.0. Mordecai hears this. He tears his clothes and he wailed loudly and bitterly. And then it says, he also gave him, one of the king's eunuchs, a copy of the text which had been issued for their destruction. And what he's going to do with this thing is show it to Esther, let her know, so she can beg the king and plead with him for her people. And it is estimated that there are 15 million Jews scattered throughout the Persian Empire. So here you have classic story of problem resolution. Major problem. Esther's words, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king, to the inner court, who is not summoned, has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds to him the golden scepter, that he may live. And now she has a problem. She's facing annihilation because she has not been summoned. If you just burst in, then you could be a threat of death. So Mordecai then makes a statement here, and this is like the center of the book. This is the major lesson, and this is a tremendous life takeaway. So he says, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. And then verse 14, this is classic. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. stop. Well, what did he just say? What's going on there? If you don't deliver us, God will deliver us some other way. He's showing faith.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I was just laughing when you stopped. That's great.
I mean, you could, okay, does it say by faith you're saved? No. Does it show by faith you're saved? Yes, it does. You see faith in there because he's affirming the Abrahamic promise. And in essence, King Xerxes, or Haman, is trying to undo the Abrahamic covenant. That there'll be the extermination of God's chosen people. So he does say, we're going to be saved one way or another. But then he goes on to say, who knows that you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? Okay, this is big. This is huge. In God's providence, each person has a unique task. And what he's saying here is, who knows, maybe your whole life that brought you to where you are now, your genes, your parents, your location, the king's favor, the way you looked, the way you acted, all of that came together so that you're here right now in a position to plead for us. Now, she has faith also because she's going to take a risk to approach the king. So she's showing faith as well. Esther told them to reply to Mordecai and go assemble all the Jews, fast for me, do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And then she says, if I perish, I perish. So she is going to do what is right and leave the rest with God. And what they do is not, so it's not just pray and do nothing. And it's not just do stuff and not pray. It's a combination of pray as though it all depended on God, work as though it depended on you, and trust God and prayer and your deeds to work together. So beautiful, beautiful. So remember that, because I'm going to go back to that. So maybe you were born for this purpose. Maybe you've attained to this position for a reason. So Mordecai tells Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace. Okay, well, this is repeat. Sorry. Verse 16. Assemble all the Jews who are in Susa, fast, and let's go on to this. With this statement, there are 5 elements for such a time as this. I love this. So there's a warning. Don't imagine you will escape. So there is a real danger. There's confidence. Relief and deliverance will come from another place. There's responsibility. You're responsible for not only yourself, but your Father's house. There's providence. Who knows, for such a time as this? And then there's the resolution, there's a resolve, fast and go and leave the rest to God. Beautiful. Now we have something, the scepter and the setup. So Esther calls a banquet with just the king and Haman invited. So Esther puts on her royal robes, stands in the inner court. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. You know what's interesting is the customs with kings. Even today in Thailand, it's a major crime to criticize the king, and you may not exit the king's palace, if I understand correctly, by doing an about face. You have to back up facing the king. And in some places, you can't be taller than the king, and stuff like that. And they have all these things for royal protocol. So the king is in this probably large room, and he has this scepter, and if you walk in, you could be killed. You don't have instant access. You have to be granted access. So when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, so you can see kind of through this opening, the king extends to Esther the golden scepter, which is in his hand. Then Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Okay, stop there. There are many people who pointed out the parallel between this and our approach to Christ. So point number one, nobody can just walk in. God is not approachable except as he grants access his way. And he has, through the blood of the atonement, extended the scepter, and we touch the scepter, meaning we have accepted his invitation, come on his terms, and we're granted access to the throne of God. And a lot of people have pointed that out.
It's the illustration of the tabernacle in the,
Yes.
in the temple.
Yes.
Also.
Yes. In the, it's not Daily Bread, but it's the, like Daily Light, they actually quote this verse, and you can tell it's in the context of having been granted access to the heavenly throne. He has extended this scepter to us. All may come, touch it, come on his terms, or accepted in the beloved. Beautiful picture. Anyway, the king says, "What's troubling you, Queen Esther? What is your request?" And she says, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet I've prepared." So she's making this banquet as kind of just a beginning to establish rapport and relationship. So, verse 9. When Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger. So Esther invites Haman, the king, so that the king will discover the plot is a direct threat to the queen, and Haman will be exposed publicly at the next meeting. So in this first party, banquet, it's just the king and Haman. It creates a relaxed atmosphere through food and wine. It's gradual trust building rather than immediate confrontation. And the tactical objectives were to inflate Haman's pride for a greater downfall. He's going to say, of all the people in the kingdom, only I was invited. Okay, so now the pride is swelling. It arouses the king's suspicion and jealousy towards Haman, positions her to expose Haman's treachery at just the right time. And at this first meeting, the king, providentially, just so happens, he offered her up to half of the kingdom. Okay, so her favor has really gone up. Now comes another, it just so happens, moment when the king has insomnia. He must be getting like my age, because I wake up at 3. Okay, so Zeresh, his wife, this is Haman's wife, and all his friends say, hey, you know what? Have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it, and then go joyfully to the rest of the banquet. So it just so happens the king has terrible insomnia. And the king says, I want someone to read to me. But instead of a bedtime story, he wants to hear the book of records. And this is probably, very likely, good things about him, encouraging things. Because they're not going to say the king really blew it here or anything like that. They're going to write positive things. So he's probably lying in bed. He says, reader, will you just open up something and read to me from the Chronicles? Okay, so it just so happened that he turns to the page where Mordecai had reported the assassination attempt. Verse 3, the king now he's an active listener. He's not just, tell me a story and I'm going to go to bed. He's listening. He's paying attention to this thing. And he said, well, what honor, what dignity was bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, he didn't get no reward. So the king now wants to acknowledge and reward Mordecai. Verse 6. So Haman comes in, the king says, what is to be done for this man, Mordecai? Haman says, he doesn't mention Mordecai. What's to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor? Haman thinks he's going to honor him. And Haman says to himself, would the king want to honor more than me? I'm sure I'm going to get this award. This is in the bag, I just know it. Verse 10, so the king says to Haman, take quickly the robes, the horse that you've said, and do so for Mordecai. Do not fall short. And he's going to, verse 11, he's going to lead Mordecai on horseback through the city square, proclaiming, thus shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. So now Mordecai gets exalted. He goes from being persecuted to being exalted. Haman hurries home crying with his head covered. He's just devastated. And then he tells Zeresh, his wife, then his wise men and Zeresh said, if Mordecai, before whom you've begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. And this is a unsaved insight, despite his pagan belief. There may have been some knowledge of biblical history, MacArthur Study Bible says. Now, here's banquet number 2, chapter 7. So, the first is the plea, verses 3 and 4. So she asks the king to spare her life and the lives of her people. She reveals that they have been sold for destruction. Then verse 6, Esther identifies Haman as the adversary and the enemy. And now he is absolutely mortified. Then the king gets in a rage. The king leaves the banquet hall in anger and goes to the palace garden. Haman stays behind to beg Esther for his life. Okay, now here's the incredible thing. I mean, this sounds cinematic. Okay, Esther's sitting on this bench. Haman is so nervous that he wants to sit next to her, and he accidentally falls on her, like he's attacking her. And guess who's watching? The king. So he's nervous, clumsy, and actually does the worst possible thing. So when the king sees Haman on Esther's couch, he orders Haman to be hanged on the same gallows Haman built for Mordecai. Let's see, I think I have a duplicate here. Verse 7 and 8. Haman stays with Queen Esther. He's going to beg for his life. Haman was falling on the couch. The king said, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? I mean, this looks as bad as anything could be. And then one of the eunuchs said, behold, the gallows which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king says, hang him on it. Key verses, and I'll let you read that. The doctrine of providence, which Mordecai affirms, could be summarized this way. God's control is all-inclusive. Nobody is going to do something that bypasses God's permissive will, God's active engagement. each person in the book of Esther acts in harmony with his or her own character, values, and beliefs. Okay, let's look at that in retrograde. Queen Esther is who she is because of her genes, because of her parents, because of her background, because of her makeup. Everything that made her look the way she is, act the way she is seen in her actions at this time. The same thing with Haman, the same thing with Mordecai. The God who established the ends established the means, and it goes all the way far back. So God's control in your life, in my life, is paramount. God blends these choices into his overarching plan, which means Esther is not acting different than she normally would act. This is who she is. This is really in keeping with her personality. Which means everything that led to that personality was also guided by God. She's not all of a sudden empowered to think differently and act differently than she's ever acted in her life. Same with Mordecai. So God blends his choices into, our choices into his overarching plan and is in control. Providence involves God working through and within the framework of natural cause and effect in distinction to miracle, which means God could have just incinerated Haman. God could have had him assassinated by someone else. God could have had him change his mind. There are all kinds of things that God could mysteriously protect all the Jews so that when people try to kill them, they can't do it. God, in this instance, chose to work through natural means. What looks like natural, but you see the hand of God operating. But we cannot escape God's hand. We can only change our destiny. We become his friends or his foes by our attitude toward him. And then Romans 8:28 is perhaps the most concise word on the providence of God that the scriptures contain. God will complete his plans. We determine our own destiny as we cooperate with his will or oppose it. Our choice affects our destiny, but it never frustrates God's plan. Now, there are some interesting parallels between Esther and Exodus. Exodus, the villain of the clash, the villain is Pharaoh, and the clash is between Moses and Pharaoh. In Esther, it's between Mordecai and Haman. The Jews in both cases are in the hands of tyrants. The celebration of this victory is the Passover, and the celebration of this victory is the Feast of Purim. So, what are the takeaways? Number one, have confidence in God, for he does care. Trust in God because his timing is perfect. Do what is right and leave the rest to God. Turn to prayer in times of crisis. And remember that God has a special place for the Jews. Some things about Haman. He represents the pagan, anti-God society. He's self-absorbed, self-indulged. All the coincidences in here, these are just some of them. There are others. So Vashti is deposed. It just so happens that the king chooses Esther, which means she's probably not beautiful, but also very lovely to be with. Everybody likes her. Mordecai hears the plot against the king. The king has insomnia just the night before he's supposed to be executed. It just so happens, he says, would you read to me? It just so happens he opens to hear the account of Mordecai saving the king's life. And the king has the presence of mind to ask, well, what reward did he get? You're not telling me, finish the story. And that's the end of the story. Well, what reward did he get? Didn't get one. Well, let's honor him. Let's do it. Everybody should know if you save the king's life, it's in my best interest. It's good for everyone else. Human responsibility aligns with divine providence. Mordecai says she's been placed in her position by God's plan. Esther also has a responsibility, though, to act on behalf of the Jews. If Esther does not play her proper role, she and her father's house will be punished. Now, when we talk about providence, we do have to say that, I'm going to quote Spurgeon, I believe all providence is of God, but not all lessons learned from providence may be of God. Case in point, Jonah is told to go to Tarshish. He just so happens, providentially, there's a boat. He's supposed to go to Nineveh. Sorry, he's supposed to go to Nineveh. It just so happens there's a ship on its way to Tarshish. Providence. There it is. Right there. So, all providence is of God, but the lessons we learn from it may be of the devil, is what Spurgeon said. So, be really careful. There's the story. There was a guy that went to seminary or Bible school, and he was bombing out. And he came from the farm. So he's now in the classroom and doing a terrible job. And finally the teacher says to him, what made you think that you were cut out for going to Bible college? And he said, well, I was on the farm, and I saw in the sky something that looked like a P and something that kind of looked like a C. And, I just thought, that's preach Christ. And the seminary teacher said, well, I looked at your grades, and I think what that really said was plant corn. So, okay. So, reversal of fortunes. Esther is elevated. Mordecai is promoted. Haman forfeits his position, wealth, and life. There are all kinds of reversals. And I'll let you read that on your own. God's providence through ordinary means. More reversals, you can read that. There are parallels between Genesis and Esther. Joseph saved the Jews and Egypt from starvation. Esther saved the Jews from genocide. Both Joseph and Esther were exalted to bring salvation, and the hand of God providentially orchestrated both. Practical applications. This might be the most important part, the takeaways. Okay, principle number 1, God is at work even when he seems silent. And the idea is, when your life feels spiritually quiet, don't assume God is absent. Assume he's actively arranging what you can't yet interpret. Relationships, timing, opportunities, and obstacles. Second point, coincidences are often God's choreography. Pay attention to small providences. A conversation, a delay, an unexpected opening. Instead of asking only, why is this happening, add, what good might God be positioning through this? And what I see is the takeaway in the book of Esther is where our ability meets God's opportunity. Where there is an opportunity that's in line with maybe he has given you this and that for this great purpose. I think of Bob and Diane with their abilities with dentistry. So there's an ability with science and the dentistry, dental help, and knowledge of the Bible, and opportunities came. He made some were arranged, and he's equipped for this very purpose. And Diane. Providence doesn't cancel responsibility, but it actually is designed to bring out faithful courage. Trusting providence is not fatalism. If God has put you where you are, that's often his call to act wisely, pray earnestly, do the next right thing, even if it costs you. And then providence turns threats into testimonies, often beyond what you ask. God can not only protect you, but transform the very situation that meant for harm into increased clarity, courage, and gratitude to be a blessing to others. Esther points to Christ. She's the epitome of purity, guilelessness, and even beauty. Christ has the beauty of holiness and glory. She accomplishes the deliverance from death for God's people, and her actions destroy the evil one. Fast forward to the end of the tribulation period. The attack on the Jews will resume with an attack on Jerusalem from all the peoples around. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 2. It will come about, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. And what this is like Haman part 2. The very design of destruction intended for the Jews will be heaped on themselves at the end of the tribulation period. In that day, I will strike every horse with bewilderment. Okay, we don't have horses today. God will cause Israel's enemies to be confused, confounded, and their means of warfare will be disabled. I will watch over the house of Judah. I will strike the horse of the peoples with blindness. And then what we see is the nations of the world are going to attack Jerusalem to try to wipe out the Jews, and the very battle that's meant to kill the Jews will kill the Gentiles who are attacking them. We see this again in World War II. This, to me, is just shocking. Hitler's some of his last words in his last will and testament. And there's some interesting things. Did you know that Hitler actually appointed a successor? There was the second Fuhrer after Hitler that ruled for 1 month. It was Karl Dönitz, the admiral of the U-boats, U-2s, the admiral. And Göring was furious because he thought he should have been it. Okay. In his last will and testament, which you can read online, by the way, he said, above all, I charge the leaders of the nation and those under them to scrupulous observance of the laws of race and to the merciless opposition to the universal poisoner of all peoples, international Jewry. And Hitler's statement in 1922 was even stronger. Once I'm in power, my first and foremost task will be the annihilation of the Jews. As soon as I have the power to do so, I will have gallows built in rows. The Jews will be hanged indiscriminately, and they will remain hanging until they stink. Unbelievable. Julius Streicher, this is an interesting story. He knew about the story of Esther. In May 1924, he wrote and published an article on Purim. And in order to publish this vicious attack, he must have had a good deal of knowledge about Jewish thought and practice. And when he was convicted, he was pushed the last 2 steps to the mortal spot beneath the hangman's rope. Streicher was swung suddenly to face the witnesses. He glared at them and he screamed, Purim Fest 1946. I think his last words. The Feast of Purim is celebrated by the Jews today with costumes. They have this traditional cookie, which I'm trying to get my wife to make.
We had them last year.
Yeah. They read the book of Esther. They have certain things they do. They give to the needy to show compassion to other people. They send gifts of food. They have special prayers. They also have this reading. They have a feast, and every time they say the name Haman, you're supposed to take this noisemaker and make some kind of a noise like boo. Curiously, Esther is one of the 5 books of the Bible read at the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, fast forward, or let's take a look. At the end of time, it's my belief that the Feast of Tabernacles is at the very end of the age. Christ has come, kingdom of glory, Garden of Eden is returning, and the feast was for 7 days, which pictures eternity. So you're in here and you have the resurrection of the dead, bodies in glory, Christ in magnificence and glory, and you're having sensory, not overloaded, sensory experience that overshadows anything the earth can have. I think we have our 5 senses so that when heaven comes, what you see, what you smell, what you taste, everything will be exalted beyond anything that's an earthly dimension. But they read these 5 books, and one of them is the book of Esther. And here's why I think it might be true. This is Weisistic theology. You don't have to believe it. The Song of Songs is passion, and that's going to show the passion we have for Christ who is in person. The book of Ruth is the kinsman redeemer. He has redeemed us and made this provision possible. The book of Lamentations, sorrow for what happened in the past. Ecclesiastes, the worthlessness of the world that was just destroyed. And the book of Esther, the deliverance of the Jews in the eschaton. And with that, we have finished Esther. To squeeze in First Chronicles, it'll be kind of a jet tour. A lot of it overlaps with First and Second Samuel. All right, First Chronicles. The outlay of the book is such as this. The first 9 chapters deal with genealogies, and I think it's okay just to kind of skim through it. And let it be known, though, Spurgeon mentioned at least one person who was actually saved by reading the genealogies. He had heard the gospel repeatedly and said, I have many years ahead of me, I'm just going to put it off. And reading the genealogies, someone lived, died, someone lived, died, someone lived, died, begot so-and-so, and died. He said, life is so short. Look at that. Just a couple of words, and that's it. He said, I could die tomorrow. And he was so convicted by the Spirit that he gave his life to Christ, being prompted. He heard the gospel before, but that prompted him to wait no longer. Another interesting story. John mentioned giving Bible verses, and in contrast to Dan Haggerty and pouring the oil on the streets and marching around the streets and anointing them, and like the Battle of Jericho, we're going to claim this for God, and not giving the gospel, just pouring oil. But the power of the Word of God. So just Bible verses, that's completely fine. That's completely good. You can give for spiritual, just Bible verses. Charles Spurgeon, when they were building the new Metropolitan Tabernacle, came in there to test the acoustics. So there were some workers in there. And many years later then, he was called to go to someone's bedside. And the person said, I was converted when you came into the church as we were building it. You were testing the acoustics, and you said in your loud, deep voice, behold the Lamb of God who taketh away the sins of the world. And he said, I heard that, and that made me convert. That was what prompted me to give my life to Christ. It's just hearing that. And he became a regular member and was in the hospital, and Mr. Spurgeon came to attend to his end-of-life needs. Anyway. So, introduction. So, first 9 chapters, genealogies, the national period, and then we have the story of King David. Chapter 10, Saul dies, And then we have a focus on the temple in Jerusalem. And then David's final years. According to Jewish tradition and the Talmud, Ezra is the author. Why? Why do they think that? Because Ezra is a priest, and this could account for its priestly orientation. It's similar in style also to the book of Ezra. Originally, 1st, 2nd Chronicles were a single book. The Hebrew title is Words of the Days, Events of the Times. It was the Greek Bible that split it into 2 books. Why did it split it into 2 books? Because Hebrew doesn't use vowels. When you put it into Greek, it doubles the size of the text. So it goes beyond a scroll. The maximum length of a scroll is 30 feet. And by the way, scrolls are very hard to be able to turn to passages quickly. They think that it was Christians. It was right after the New Testament period was going on that the first time that had the book that opens up with a spine. First time in history. And those books, the technical term for that is codex. And the plural is codices. And this enabled Christians to be able to reference Old Testament, New Testament for the first time, combined with the Roman roads that Caesar unwittingly built to help spread the gospel everywhere. Okay. What the things that are emphasized in Chronicles is the line of David, the throne, but mostly the temple and the rituals. The themes would be God's control of history, Christ reigning forever as King of Kings, the Davidic covenant, and the proper worship of God, and the temple as God's house. The book is addressed to the returning remnant. And when we compare Samuel in Kings with Chronicles, 2 Samuel through Kings emphasizes the prophetic perspective, whereas in Chronicles we have the priestly perspective. There's a political emphasis in Samuel Kings, but religious emphasis in Chronicles. The wars are prominent in Samuel Kings. The temple is prominent in Chronicles. There's a record of both nations, where here the record is primarily Judah. Continuing history of the nation, continuity of David's line, man's failure, God's faithfulness. Can I tell you an interesting fact? In the Hebrew Bible, 2nd Chronicles is the last book, not Malachi. It's the last book. Okay, so when you read it then, you have King of Israel, King of Israel, King of Israel, and then the last one is deposed. And so when you come to the end of it, your big question is, okay, who's the next king going to be? Aha, turn to the New Testament. Where is he who was born King of the Jews? It connects directly to the last king. The last reigning person in Israel was Zedekiah. And by the way, it's a really interesting study to do a contrast between evil King Zedekiah and righteous King Jesus. So you have the next to last with the final one, and how they contrast is really interesting. Anyway, yeah.
That's why Matthew
Yes.
is the first book of the New Testament, because
Yes.
it's about the king, the coming
Yes.
king. That would make sense then.
Yes. In
Let's
fact,
go right into that.
yeah, absolutely. And so when you're reading the Tanakh, you see the last king Zedekiah. Okay, what's happening? And now
Yeah.
here is the one born King of the Jews, and the Magi are coming. Everyone's coming, and everything. So yeah, it's great. What we see is God's control in history. God wishes to dwell with his people in holiness. The tabernacle and the temple symbolize this. Now, Here's a little wisistic theology, you don't have to believe it. I think the tabernacle represents the first coming of Christ. It's humble. It's just got like a little tent, and it's the same word for tent that is used for the word dwell, that the word became flesh and tabernacled with us. And I think the temple, with its magnificence, glory, opulence, is Christ at his second coming. So 2 comings. First coming, like the tabernacle. Second coming, like Solomon's temple. Chronicles shows God's working from Adam through David to the post-exile remnant. And the main idea is that God is orchestrating history to accomplish his purpose of dwelling with his people. So it goes from tabernacle to temple, Christ, the church, and then New Jerusalem, and then the Christ is filling the new heavens and new earth with his presence, finally. We see the covenant with David and proper worship of God, and fundamentally, nobody can just come to God on his or her own terms. I mean, like square one of the Bible is, you may not approach God on your own way. Not always lead. I mean, we have that picture of King Ahasuerus, and you walk into the room without permission, and that you just signed your own death warrant. So he has to extend, and you have to touch. You approach him the correct way, you're allowed in, and it's the same with Christ. Jerusalem, Ornan's threshing floor, is established as the proper worship location. So what we learn is that both the place and the manner of worship matter to God. The challenge was for the people returning from the exile. Do you see what we had here? Why don't you come and let's rebuild? The ultimate fulfillment will be the physical temple pointing to eternal reality of God's presence with man. The Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb will be its temple in the new heavens and the new earth. In fact, I used to think that one of the maybe the main theme of the Bible is the temporalization of the universe. Okay, it started in the garden. Then with Christ embodied God's presence, the church is God's presence, and then all things will be summed up in Christ. The entire universe now is going to be the temple of God. You can't get away from that temple. So in a sense, all of it is under submission to God and becomes the presence of God, where you can't go away from it. Let me go to. Ezra is an educated scribe. He is said to have assembled an extensive library for, Nehemiah is supposedly assembled an extensive library for Ezra to use in compiling Chronicles. And that's from 2 Maccabees. Let me say something about Maccabees. That is not the Bible. It's not altogether bad writing. And I think it's 2 Maccabees actually has some really interesting information of the persecution of the Jews by Antiochus Epiphanes. And if you read the portion of what this wicked Greek king did, Antiochus, the fourth was it, I think, what he did to the Jews in persecuting them resembles Antichrist in the book of Revelation. I mean, you could just look at he made circumcision punishable by death, and he desecrates the altar. I think, if I understand correctly, urinated on the altar, offered a pig on the altar, and then it was reconsecrated. And so he becomes the picture child of the Daniel chapter 11, who prefigures Antichrist. And you can actually get some benefit by reading his misdeeds in in Maccabees, and then connecting them to the book of Revelation. Anyway, just my thought. David's life, it includes David's preparations for the temple, and it leaves out the struggles with Saul, 7 years that he wasn't king, that he was only king of Hebron, his wives, the sin with Bathsheba, and the rebellion, because he's focusing on the temple. Key verses, verse 12, he will build for me a house. By the way, the Hebrew word for house is so generic and so big it can mean all kinds of things. So when they're talking about they entered a house, it's a building. If they say it's a house of bread, it's a bakery. If they say it's a house of tools, it would be like a workroom. And so you get this idea of house of building up. In modern Hebrew, a house of books is a library. Yeah. But house can also mean a large family line. The house of Israel isn't a building. And Jesus said, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. It means heaven in all its dimensions. The parameters of the redeemed. So when he will build for me a house, yes, he's going to build a temple. I will establish his throne. Key verse, thine, O Lord, is the greatness, the power, and the glory. And I believe this is the verse that's used, tacked on the Our Father, which is a beautiful, beautiful addition. Have we ever thought that there are lots of great life lessons from prayers? It's true. Bible prayers are instructive. They are patterns. They are theological, but they are also practical. Great examples for us to emulate. Hannah's prayer is one of the best prayers in the Old Testament. Absolutely magnificent and strategic, and she lays down the whole thing of attributes of God, reversals, and the promise of the Messiah to judge at the end of the age. In a similar way, David's final prayer in 1 Chronicles 29 is magnificent, absolutely stellar prayer. Attributes of God, praise and worship, the brevity of life, the need for humility and a right heart. And then Solomon's dedicatory prayer in 1 Kings 8 of God's covenant faithfulness, warning against turning from God, need for a good testimony, and the takeaway. Study Psalms and prayers for lessons on practical Christian living. Emulate them. Chapter 17 is the key chapter and deals with the Davidic covenant, which we've covered before. Genealogies show big picture scheme of God's purposes. Promises of God will continue through the age. And then connecting the genealogies with Adam suggests that Israel is the goal of God's purpose in creation. It connects. And we see this also with the gospel genealogies. The genealogies point forward to the Messiah and things. Okay. In 1 Chronicles chapters 2 through 9, starting with the world, it narrows down to Israel as a nation. And then Jerusalem, the whole city, narrows down to the area of the temple. So we see this microscope getting, focusing in on a single strand of themes. Chapter 10 is the reign of Saul. 11 through 16, the reign of David. There are 76 references to David in this. And in chapters 11 to 29, the ark is the major topic. And in regard to the ark, David is everything that Saul was not. Okay, backspace a minute. How many Psalms did Saul write? None. How many times did he lead the people in worship? None. Okay, so there's a conspicuous omission here. It's like, wait a minute, there's something really missing here. Where is it? I went to school in Tennessee for a little while, and there were no Mexican restaurants. No, they just went Chinese restaurant. I couldn't find anything. We had this awful craving for some kind of spicy food or some ethnic food, and not just spaghetti and lasagna all the time. And it was really hard to find. You start thinking, where are these places? None. It's a podunk town or something. I don't know. Okay. So what we see with Saul is a conspicuous absence of passion for God, complete absence of his leading people in worship, in his prayer. And what you see with David is the opposite. And that's part of what made him great. David prepares for the temple. He conquers Jerusalem from the Jebusites. He brings up the ark from Kiriath-Jearim to Jerusalem. He sets up the temple choir and composes psalms. I mean, he's a leader. He's leading a spiritual revival. 1 Chronicles 10:13 gives a really interesting comment. It says, Saul died for his trespass, because the word of the Lord which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium and did not inquire of the Lord. And then look at this last statement. Okay, Saul falls on his own sword. But here it says, therefore God killed him and turned the kingdom to David, which is interesting. We do see in Chronicles, David sins by numbering the people. And what's wrong with doing this? It's just a census. But God sees deeper than we see. And God sees a lack of faith. And the faith that he lacks is the ability of God to save his people, no matter what the number is. So whatever happened, God does not approve of the attitude. And there are consequences to his sin. And we see that Satan was behind the temptation. So there's a battle with Satan going on. In verse 8, what we do see is that David has a really wonderful model confession of sin. He's not trying to hide it or minimize it. He says, I have sinned greatly. Please take away the iniquity of your servant. I have done foolishly. So God gives him a choice. It could be 3 years of famine, 3 months to be swept away, or 3 days of the sword of the Lord, pestilence of the land, and the angel of the Lord destroying throughout the territory. Now, we've talked about the angel of the Lord being equated with God before, and here it's pretty strong. Look at this. I'll ask you, who does David see in verse 16? Who does it say he saw? Angel of the Lord. Now drop down to verse 17. Who was that? David said to who? God? So you see angel and God interchangeable. And there's no question that this has to be the same thing. He addresses the angel as, O Lord my God. Now think about this. Think about Michael the archangel and Daniel saying, O God, and bowing down to him. Yeah, that wouldn't fit. So he sees the angel, and realize that angel means messenger. It can be a created being sometimes, but it can mean one who is just sent, one who's dispatched. So he's dispatched standing between heaven and earth. And that's kind of interesting because he is the intermediary between heaven and earth. He reveals God and he atoned for our sins for God. So David says to God, I am the one who has sinned and done very wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let thy hand be against me and my father's house. Protect the people. And there is this threshing floor that he's going to purchase that maybe it isn't this exact one, but it's like this. And it will become the site of the future temple. So he's told, go erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah, or Ornan in Chronicles, the Jebusite. David, in verse 21, says, to buy the threshing floor from you in order to build the altar, he wants to buy it that the plague be held back from the people. David announces his intentions. He wants to buy this land, and this land is going to be the site where sin is atoned for, and judgment for sin is averted. So Araunah says, O Lord, my king, let my Lord the king take and offer up what is good in his sight. And he says, basically, you can have the oxen. I've sold you the land. Okay, we've signed a real estate deal. Guess what? You get the furniture. You get the animals. So you don't have to pay anything extra for them. You bought the land, the animals come with it, just go with it. And David says, no, I will surely buy it for you for a price, for I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God, which costs me nothing. Ooh, ooh. And what we learn here is the costliness, the sacrifice is part of what's pleasing to God. David builds an altar there. The Lord is moved, the plague is held back. David calls to the Lord. The Lord answers him with fire from heaven on the burnt offering. He offers sacrifice, and the result, verse 30, David could not go before it to inquire of God because he was terrified by the sword of the angel of the Lord. What we learned in this episode is Ornan's threshing floor is a model of priorities. Okay, so if man were to do it, it would be some place like St. Peter's Basilica, maybe with, Michelangelo's work and candles and lights and everything. Okay, this place where sin is dealt with is a simple, unadorned place, not a fancy church. It's a place of ordinary work. It's a place from which bread was brought forth. It's a place where the justice of God was met, sin confessed, sacrifice was offered and accepted. And it's on God's terms, not ours. David then gives a model prayer. Blessed are you, O Lord God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, Lord, is the greatness, the power, and the glory, and the victory, and the majesty. Yours is the dominion, O Lord, and you exalt yourself as head over all. Magnificent. God is supreme king. Verse 12, the kings of Israel needed to know that power and victory belong to the Lord, not to themselves. And then the result of the approval, verse 13, now therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. And then humility of heart, acknowledging God's sovereignty. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to offer as generously as this? For all things come from you, and from your hand we have given you.
You know that Acts formula that they have, adoration?
Yes.
Does it fit anything in the Bible, or where did they come up with that?
Yeah,
It's used quite a bit. Do you
Yeah.
like it?
Yeah. Medium, the answer is there's not one right way. There are many different ways. And I think it's good to study the model prayers of Paul in the epistles. And they don't always follow that pattern. I think there should be thanksgiving. I think there should be asking for forgiveness of sins.
Confession.
Acknowledging who God is, and being thankful, and asking for blessings.
Supplication. So all
Yeah.
the elements are
Yeah.
there, but it's not really
Yeah.
a biblical prayer
Yeah.
model,
Yeah.
probably.
There is a book by Boa and Anders that I absolutely love, and it's on Kindle, also on biblical style of prayers. And I can send you the link, and I can send you the screenshot of what it looks like. So I like that very much. I also think it's a really good idea to pray through Scripture. Take a passage of Scripture, and maybe start with some of the great ones like 2 Corinthians 5, and weave the thoughts, elements, and vocabulary into your prayers, and they're fantastic. Plus, you get more out of it because you're forcing yourself to have active engagement with the text. And then just real fast, we're sojourners, verse 15. David emphasizes the heart. The word occurs 5 times in verses 17 and 18. The flow of the prayer is shortness of life, understanding of who God is, need for a right heart. And then it says, so they ate and drank that day before the Lord with great gladness. And this points to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And we will eat and drink with the Lord with great gladness that day. And what we see, the temple is the world view goal. We have the presence of God, which we'll have in heaven. We have atonement, which is forgiveness of sins and redemption. We have obedience and holiness through the Spirit of God working in our lives. We're under the authority of the Son of God, the King. We offer him prayer and worship. We offer him our bodies as living sacrifices, and we delight in him. One of my favorite things when we study Psalms especially is this: God is delighted when we delight in him. God is delighted when we delight in him. What do you like the most? That matters to God. And then we see the storyline of redemption, starting with Adam, the original creation, the promise of Abraham, Israel chosen. Then we have Jesus Christ at his first coming, the remnant of the Jews, the grafting in of the Gentiles, future remnant of the 144,000 Jews in the tribulation period, and then Jesus Christ is coming in great power and glory. He is the Davidic son, the king who will reign forever on the throne of David, and to him be all honor, glory, and blessing. Would somebody close us in prayer?
Heavenly Father, we praise you for your power and your